You know those stars who just look like old Hollywood? Like you see them and you're instantly transported to another time? That's Laura La Plante. She was Universal's darling in the 1920s, appearing in almost 40 films for them. And like so many stars of the day, her story has just as much to offer behind the scenes as it did on screen. I'm Antonia Carlotta, and this is Universally Me, the channel for all things Universal and classic horror. My family started Universal, and they launched Laura La Plante to superstardom. Also, I have to give a shout out to the book Laura La Plante, Silent Cinderella by Laura Gerolds. It's the first ever full-length biography of Laura La Plante. It contributed a lot to the making of this video. So if you feel inspired to learn more about Laura after watching and you want to dive deeper into the stories, go get that book. I've linked it below. It also has some amazing pictures in it. Laura La Plante was born November 1st, 1904 in St. Louis, Missouri to William La Plante and Elizabeth E. Turk. Not so many actresses managed to go into the industry back in the day without totally changing their name, but Laura La Plante almost did it. The only changes she made were adding a space between law and plant and adding an E at the end to make it feminine. Her father taught dance, but he didn't always have students, and they often found that they were just scraping pennies together to get by. And Laura's mother had this realization that that was not how she wanted to live. She divorced Laura's father, and Laura, her mother, and Laura's sister Violet all moved out to San Diego. Over summer breaks, Laura would go stay with her cousin Mary in Hollywood, and one summer when she was there, she responded to an ad looking for children for motion pictures, and she was hired. Laura was really excited to see the money she could make, not just for herself, but also to help her family out. Her mom had started to lose her hearing and she couldn't really work anymore. And pretty soon, Laura was hired as an extra for the Christie Film Company, making comedies for $5 a day. Laura La Plante had a good look and she was excited to learn. She found that she had something of an advantage, never having taken acting classes before because she had nothing to unlearn. She was just this blank slate, ready to pick up whatever her directors or fellow actors were willing to teach her. Also, I should mention, at this time, Laura La Plante's look is super different than what we know of her look today. She, in her movies, would often have these like big brown Mary Pickford curls. They were very trendy, but Laura herself didn't really like them, but she could also acknowledge that they were probably right for the roles that she was playing. Her first credited role came as a Grand Duchess Genevieve in a movie called 813, based on a mystery novel of the same name. But really soon after that, she was let go from the Christie Film Company and scraping for pennies again. Thankfully, she wasn't down on her luck for too long. Soon after, she was hired in a movie called The Old Swimmin' Hole at $125 per week. She thought that her role in The Old Swimmin' Hole was going to be her launch, but she ended up falling into something of a dry spell after. And this made her really insecure. She honestly suffered with shyness and insecurity for like her whole life. But one night she decides that she's going to go downtown to the Ambassador Hotel, just dance and let off some steam. And a director from Fox sees her there. He calls her up. He asks if she knows how to ride a horse. She doesn't, but she lies and says that she does. So he offers her a role in some westerns. And thankfully, she was able to just wing it and pull off the horseback riding. It was her third role at Fox in a film called Play Square that caught the eye of Universal, and Laura La Plante decided to make the move. Her first film with Universal was The Call of Blood, shot by my great-grandfather Edward Laemmle. Laura La Plante followed it up with 24 other shorts and westerns, mostly starring Art Accord, Harry Gribben, and mostly directed by Edward Laemmle or Robert Hill. She was almost always playing a wife, a damsel in distress, or the love interest, but she was really eager to climb the ladder and get bigger roles in bigger movies. Thankfully, Carl Laemmle was starting to take notice and she was about to get her wish, but perhaps a little more than she bargained for. Laura La Plante was officially cast in her first serial in 1922 called The Perils of the Yukon, and it was truly perilous making it. Laura played Olga Basanoff, the daughter of a Russian trader who falls in love with an Englishman. Rather than film in Alaska, they filmed in Truckee, California, near Lake Tahoe. Laura and her fellow cast and crewmates would have to walk 3.5 miles every single day to their filming location in the high Sierras, often carrying gear that they needed for filming. And then at the end of the day, they'd have to walk all the way back. And in their hotel, there was only one bath on each floor for everybody to share, so I imagine things were pretty smelly. Laura performed all her own stunts, including being thrown into an icy stream and a chase through the woods, and 2 of her fellow actors were actually hospitalized after a patch of ice and snow gave out, and they plunged 50 feet into the river below. And if that wasn't enough, Laura herself almost died one night when her hotel caught fire. Her castmate, William Desmond, rushed in to carry her out. He got burned in the process, but honestly, if not for him, she very likely would have died that night. Even when she finished filming at Universal City, it still wasn't easy because now it was the height of summer and they were still filming in these huge fur coats as if they were in an Alaskan winter. I guess it was worth it though because Perils of the Yukon drew huge crowds and it was a huge success for Universal. And Laura soon found herself performing similarly crazy stunts in her follow-up Around the World in 18 Days, where she was falling out of windows and off of cliffs and off of horses and out of airplanes. In Laura's own words, it was terrible, but great training. When Universal tried to cast Laura La Plante in a 3rd serial, she was suddenly kind of on shaky ground when she turned it down. She was really afraid of being pigeonholed in serials, which was quite common back then, but Universal was not happy. Thankfully, Universal still gave her a chance. They cast her in some westerns with Hoot Gibson, and these roles were a little meatier and they really let her shine. And this was perfect because it led to her being named a Wampas Baby Star in 1923. I've actually been thinking about making a Wampas Baby Star video, just like explaining what it was, because I know it sounds silly, but it was a huge deal back in the day. It was like making the Forbes 30 under 30 list, or if you were on that infamous Vanity Fair cover with all the teen stars, it could legitimately make an actress. Now that she was a Wampas Baby Star, Universal actually took Laura La Plante seriously, giving her better opportunities. Her big break came in 1924, filming Sporting Youth with Reginald Denny. The film was a success and everyone loved Laura La Plante. And as I mentioned before, Laura La Plante actually had longer, darker hair all the way up until this time. But it was for her 1924 film Butterfly that she cut it into a bob and she dyed it a lighter blonde. Now, this bob, it was all the rage at the time, the same way that the Mary Pickford curls had been. But Laura La Plante would keep this hair for the rest of her life. In 1927, The Cat and the Canary was another game changer, not just for Laura La Plante, but for Universal as a whole. Directed by Paul Lenny, The Cat and the Canary was a masterclass in atmosphere, scares, and fun. In the film, 20 years after the death of Cyrus West, his greedy relatives come to see who gets his fortune. Laura plays Annabelle West, who is named the heir, but she must prove her sanity or it will fall to a different heir. And of course, eerie occurrences start making her question her grasp on reality after all. Her performance was fantastic. She had great timing for those comedic moments and the perfect wide-eyed terror for the suspenseful times too. And like, if she wasn't already Universal's top star, which she was, this movie really solidified it. And of course, I have to mention the 1929 Showboat, which I've shared some wild behind-the-scenes stories from. It's perhaps not the best version of Showboat, but Laura La Plante did a really wonderful job. And one of the best pieces, I think, that my family still has in our collection is a banjo from the 1929 Showboat signed by Laura La Plante, Harry Pollard, and the rest of the Showboat cast. With a career on top of the world, you would think Laura La Plante would have been ecstatic, but while she didn't take her career for granted, she also couldn't wait to retire. Later in life, she would say, "Had I continued making picture after picture, I'd never have had the time to really live and enjoy my family. My career was wonderful, but then so were the years that followed. I consider myself to be a very lucky person." She especially had less time once sound came into play. She actually had an easier time transitioning to sound than many actresses, but now at the end of her workday, she couldn't just go home and relax. all of her time was devoted to memorizing lines, and that was no fun for her. And in general, she just had a life behind the scenes that she was starting to enjoy more. In 1924, she met director William Sider. He had worked closely with Reginald Denny, and he had directed Laura on a couple of films. They got married in 1926. I will say they had a perfectly wonderful marriage, but I think in a lot of it, that spark was just missing for them. They were friends first and foremost. So during their marriage, Laura actually spent a lot of time traveling. She would go to Hawaii, to New York. And then in the 1930s, she goes to Europe and decides that she wants to stay there. So that's when she and William finally amicably divorce. And around this time, a new man enters her life, one that had actually been there all the way at the beginning. When Laura La Plante was working at Universal, she was often driven to and from the studio by a young prop boy named Irving Asher, who had the biggest crush on her. The two of them did go on a couple dates, but nothing really came of it. But now in Europe, she runs into him because he is running Warner Brothers studio at Teddington. She takes the opportunity to appear in a couple of his movies, and later in 1934, they get married, and they had 2 kids, Jill and Anthony. I know we already talked about one fire that Laura La Plante escaped while she was filming Perils of the Yukon, but in the 1930s in Surrey, England, she escaped a second fire. This one happened at the home of New York City Mayor James J. Walker's house, and it burnt the house to the ground. And rumors swirled about this fire because many thought that it was started intentionally to destroy evidence that led to his resignation as mayor. But I think as far as we know today, that's not the case. It was accidental, especially because Laura was sick in bed at the time and she barely made it out alive. But also, I guess we'll never know. Over the next few years, Laura La Plante happily became a housewife in England, taking care of her 2 kids while Irving continued working. But then with the onset of World War II in 1939, they thought it was best if Laura and the kids returned to California for the next few years, while Irving chose to stay abroad and join the England Army's film unit, making anti-Nazi films and recording the war. If it weren't for the war, Laura and her family probably would have stayed in England for the rest of their lives. But in 1945, Irving Asher came back to California, and that's where they decided to stay. Laura did act occasionally. In the 1940s, she briefly had a contract with MGM, and that really helped the family with money since so much of their money was tied up in England. And it's really funny to think about, but her kids were so confused when she started going to the studio to work just like their dad, because they had no idea that their mom was an actress. They just thought of her as the woman who stayed home with them. In the 1950s, she did some TV appearances and interviews. She was astonished by how much the industry had changed in the 20 or 30 years since she had been a star. But she was also really comforted by all of the familiar faces she saw from those early days. You know, at her core, Laura La Plante truly was reserved and shy, and she was so much more comfortable out of the spotlight than in it. So then in the 1960s, Laura and her husband retired to Palm Desert, where she took up sculpting, and she made great friends, and she loved her new life. She and her husband remained in love and married until he passed away in 1985. And finally, in 1989, Laura La Plante went to live at the Motion Picture Home in Woodland Hills, a retirement facility for people who worked in the motion picture industry. On October 14th, 1996, Laura La Plante passed away at 91 years old from complications related to Alzheimer's. It is so cool knowing that Laura La Plante, who was such an important part of a decade with my Uncle Carl Laemmle and Junior Laemmle, was still alive in my own lifetime. That so rarely happens. And it is times like these that I wish my Aunt Carla was still alive. I would love to ask her about Laura La Plante. I have no doubt that their paths would have crossed. Laura La Plante isn't necessarily a name that's super well known today, but she is such an important part of film history. For those of you who have seen The Cat and the Canary or that 1929 Showboat, I know you know her. And, you know, she has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame right over by Hollywood and Cahuenga. She was one of the very first stars to get one. So Anyway, if you guys are paid members on YouTube, I want to let you guys know I'm already in pre-production on a Laura La Plante tour. There are so many iconic spots that I know around here that she lived and worked. I have to share them with you. And don't forget that you can get tons of other bonus content, pictures, videos, and more by becoming a paid member. And if you love these old Hollywood deep dives, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.